Story 1: Shadows of the Past. I've never been the type of person to fully believe in ghosts. The way I see it, if we ever do encounter something out of the ordinary, it's probably something we don't quite understand yet, like interdimensional beings or echoes of the past. But even with that perspective, there are three experiences in my life that have left me questioning what I saw, heard, and felt. These events weren't just fleeting moments, they linger in my memory like shadows, refusing to fade. Each encounter was different, yet they all seemed to share one common theme: death. Whether it was tied to places, objects, or people, death seemed to cast a long, haunting shadow. Here are my stories. The Man in the Top Hat. The first time something truly strange happened, I was just 6 years old. Back then, my dad worked for a funeral company, which wasn't as creepy as it sounds, at least not to me. One of the perks of his job was that we got a great deal on an apartment right above the funeral home. To an adult, that might seem unsettling, but I was a curious and carefree kid. The idea of corpses downstairs wasn't scary. If anything, it was fascinating. My younger brother, who was 4 at the time, and I shared a small bedroom. The room itself had an eerie feature. The chimney for the cremation furnace ran right through one wall and past the only window. The furnace was used often, but as kids, we didn't give it much thought. It was around Christmas when the first strange thing happened. I woke up one night to the sound of movement in the living room. My first thought wasn't fear, it was excitement. Maybe it was my dad sneaking around to put presents under the tree. Or maybe our cat was getting into the decorations. Either way, I had to see for myself. The apartment was dark, except for the dim glow of the Christmas tree lights, which cast flickering shadows on the walls. I crept out of my room and tiptoed down the hallway. From where I stood, I could see the tree and the swivel rocking chair next to it. The chair was facing the tree, and someone was sitting in it. At first, I thought it was my dad. But as I stepped closer, I realized something was off. The figure wasn't moving, and it didn't look like anyone I knew. It was completely black, like a shadow, with no discernible features. It wore a top hat, tilted slightly forward. Before I could fully process what I was seeing, the figure slowly turned the chair to face me. That was all I needed to see. I turned and bolted back to my room, slamming the door shut behind me. My heart was pounding as I shook my brother awake. "There's someone out there," I whispered urgently. He groggily sat up as I grabbed a flashlight from our closet. Together, we crept back to the hallway. I felt a mix of fear and determination. Maybe it was just my imagination, and if I could prove that to myself, I'd be able to sleep again. We crouched behind a piece of furniture near the hallway and peeked around the corner. The chair was turned back toward the tree. The figure was still sitting there. I whispered to my brother, "On the count of 3, I'll turn on the flashlight." But before I could count, the figure turned the chair toward us again and began to rise. I didn't wait to see what happened next. My brother and I sprinted back to our room, slamming the door and huddling under the covers. We talked about what we'd seen, trying to make sense of it, but eventually exhaustion took over and we fell asleep. We never saw the man in the top hat again, but I've never forgotten that night. The Shadow by the Shed. By the time I was 17, I had chalked up the top hat man to an overactive childhood imagination. But that changed one summer while I was working with my dad. In addition to his regular job, my dad ran a handyman business on the side, and I often helped him to earn some extra cash. One of his clients lived out in a heavily wooded area, surrounded by acres of trees. I hated going there. The woods were alive with bears, snakes, and other creatures that made me uneasy. The client had a small, weathered shed near the front of his property. It sat behind a cluster of trees, in a spot that seemed oddly isolated. Something about the shed always gave me the creeps. though I couldn't explain why. One afternoon, after we finished our work, I sat in the car waiting for my dad. From where I was parked, I had a clear view of the shed. That's when I saw it, a tall black figure standing beside the shed. It wasn't human. It was too dark, too still. Before I could react, the figure moved, ducking under the shed. I yelled for my dad, convinced it was a bear. He came over to check but found nothing. I was shaken, but we went home, and I tried to put it out of my mind. The next time we visited the client, I had to clean up around the shed. Out of curiosity, I looked for a hole or space where something could crawl underneath. There was nothing. Whatever I saw couldn't have fit under there. Later, my dad mentioned the shed to the client, joking about the weird experiences. The client's expression turned serious. He explained that the shed had belonged to his late father-in-law, who practiced Santeria. He passed away in the shed, and his wife kept it as a sort of memorial. I don't know what I saw that day, but it wasn't a bear. The graveyard out back. A few years later, when I was 20, I moved into a house owned by an older couple. They had lived there for decades and had an unusual backyard, a pet cemetery. Over the years, they had buried every animal they ever owned, each grave marked with a small headstone. There were over 20 of them. One day, I was doing yard work near the cemetery. As I worked, I felt a sudden chill that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. It only lasted a moment, but it was enough to make me uneasy. That night, as usual, I woke up to use the bathroom. My bedroom was closest to the dining area, and as I stepped into the hallway, I saw it, a black figure sitting at the kitchen table. It was the same type of figure I'd seen before, completely dark, featureless, and motionless. I blinked, and it was gone. The next morning, I told my brother, who also lived there. His face went pale as he told me about his own experience that night. He'd woken up to the sound of footsteps in his room, though he thought it was just a dream. Final thoughts. I still don't know what to make of these experiences. Were they ghosts, interdimensional beings, or was my mind playing tricks on me? What I do know is that they all seem to happen in places tied to death, whether it was a funeral home, a shed with a tragic history, or a backyard filled with graves. Maybe there's something about death that lingers, something that draws these entities to certain places. Or maybe, in moments of stillness, we catch glimpses of something we're not meant to understand. What do you think? Story 2. The haunting of my family home. I've lived in this house for most of my life. It's a family home, passed down through generations, and as long as I can remember, something has always been here with us. I don't know what it is. I don't know what it wants. But after all these years, I've accepted that it isn't going anywhere. I moved back in at the start of the pandemic, reclaiming my old bedroom, the only place in the house where I can sleep undisturbed. If I try anywhere else, things get worse, much worse. One time, I decided to sleep in the room across the hall, thinking a change of scenery might help. That was a mistake. The first night, I woke up in a panic, my blanket ripped off of me, and the bed shaking so violently that the headboard slammed against the wall. I barely slept after that, convinced it was just a fluke, a bad dream mixed with an overactive imagination. The second night, the exact same thing happened. The third night, I barely had time to drift off before the blanket was yanked from my body, and the bed trembled beneath me like something was trying to shake me out of it. That was the last straw. I grabbed my things and moved back into my room. The second I settled in, everything stopped. It was as if whatever lives in this house wanted me in that specific room, and I wasn't about to test its patience again. The tapping and scratching, it happens every night. Tap, 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 scratch, scratch, scratch. Right next to my bed, just beyond my window. The sound of long nails scraping against the glass, deliberate and slow. Like whatever is out there knows I'm awake. It wants me to know it's there. I've tried everything to explain it away. Maybe tree branches swaying in the wind. Maybe an animal climbing up the side of the house. But there are no trees near my window, and every time I check my camera, nothing. Absolutely nothing. My window is painted over with blackout paint, so I can't see directly outside. But in the faintest slivers of light, I can make out something moving, a shadow, a silhouette shifting just beyond the glass. Never a clear shape, never a clear face, just the suggestion of something watching me. And it's not just me who hears it. My child, sleeping in the next room over, has called out in the middle of the night, asking me about the scratching noises. When I tell them it's just the wind, I know I'm lying. It happens at least 3 times a week, like clockwork. The heavy footsteps. The running is worse. At least once a week, I wake up to the sound of heavy, frantic footsteps pounding through my room. It's not just creaking floorboards or the settling of the house. No, this is someone running, fast, circling the bed, darting across the floor. It stops the second I turn on the light. I've tried recording it before, setting my phone up beside me, but the moment I hit record, the footsteps go silent. Sometimes I'll lay there, pretending to be asleep, waiting, but the second I make a move, dead silence, like it knows, like it's toying with me. The cold touch. Then there's the touching. It starts with a faint chill against my skin, like a drop in temperature isolated to one spot, a single place on my arm, my back, the curve of my neck. Sometimes it's nothing more than a brush, so quick I can almost convince myself I imagined it. But sometimes it lingers, fingers pressing against my leg, a hand resting on my side. The worst is when my foot is sticking out from under the blanket and I feel it grip my ankle. The moment I move, it's gone. It doesn't happen every night, but it happens often enough that I've stopped reacting. I let it happen, because what else can I do? The animals know I have 2 dogs and 2 cats. They all sleep in my bed with me. Yes, all of them. And no, I don't care what anyone thinks. They're my children, and if they want to pile into bed with me every night, they can. And yet, despite their differences, despite the fact that they're always moving, shifting, and chasing one another around the house, sometimes they all freeze at the same time. I've seen it happen. They'll be playing 1 second, then in perfect unison, they'll stop, heads snapping toward the same corner of the room. Their ears perk, their tails stiffen, and then they start to growl, low warning growls. Not the kind they make when someone knocks on the door, but the kind that makes the hair on the back of my neck stand up. They see something. They know something is there. I can't see it, but I feel it. The endless haunting. You'd think after all of this, I'd be terrified. And I was for a long time. But over the years, the fear has faded into something else. Annoyance. I've tried everything. Cleansings, blessings, banishings, binding rituals, every method of getting rid of whatever this is. Nothing has worked. It's still here. At this point, I don't expect it to leave. It's not violent, it's not malicious. It's just there, lurking in the walls, whispering in the dark, pressing cold fingers against my skin when I least expect it. Maybe it's tied to the house. Maybe it's tied to me. Either way, I've accepted that I'm never really alone here, and maybe, just maybe, I never have been. Please like and Subnautica.